They are forced into isolation. They are forced to practice from sunup to sundown. They are forced to exercise because their dad's always telling them that they're fat, so they gotta have an hour of exercise every day. They're forced to perform for him every night while he criticizes them up one side and down the other. They're forced to weekly humiliate themselves in front of their peers, which feels like a tactic on his part to be like, see, you don't want to be friends with them anyway because they're mean. Hello, how are you? Welcome to my channel. My name is Cheer Denise. Welcome to Storytime. Today's Wednesday. We got a little story for you. And let me just tell you this much right now. This is a story that I heard a couple weeks ago and I've been obsessed with it because it is so strange. This is a story of a band called the Shaggs. There were 3 girls in the band, all sisters. And they were in this band not because they wanted to, but because they were forced to because of a prophecy that their grandmother had made over their lives. And their father felt that he had to make this prophecy a reality. This is a group who went largely unrecognized for decades and then was rediscovered in the late 80s and 90s. Frank Zappa believed this band was better than the Beatles. And there are pictures of Kurt Cobain wearing t-shirts with the picture of this band's first album. And he also said that the Shaggs were one of his favorite groups. But what's the weird story behind their music? Because while Frank Zappa might have thought that this music was better than the Beatles, other commentators had things like this to say about the music. After listening to this music, I am in the fetal position, writhing in pain. This music is hauntingly bad. One person said, I would walk across the desert while eating charcoal briquettes soaked in Tabasco for 40 days and 40 nights, not to ever have to listen to anything Shag related ever again. In an article written in The New Yorker in 1999, that author described the music as winsome but raggedly discordant pop. Something is sort of wrong with the tempo, and the melodies are squashed, bent, nasal, and deadpan. The author also goes on to describe the lyrics as homely and blunt. So how did this band, who by most estimations made some of the worst music you've ever heard, end up becoming such a cult favorite? And is it possibly because the story behind the band is so weird that you end up being drawn into the music not because it's good, but because the story behind them is so unusual? So what's the story? Let me tell you. Okay, so it's 1965. In Fremont, New Hampshire, there was a family called the Wiggins. Now, the Wiggins were no different really than their neighbors and their peers. This is a mill town. This was a poor, poor town. Most families were barely making it paycheck to paycheck, and the Wiggins were no different. Annie and Austin Wiggins had 6 children, and they were struggling to put food on the table. But Austin had a dream, and his dream was that he was going to prove that his family was better than the rest of this town. And he had a little prophecy in his back pocket to let him know that his dream was not just a figment of his imagination, but would actually come to be. Because you see, Austin's mother had been a palm reader. She liked to read tarot cards, and it was sort of this side thing that she would do. And when Austin had been a boy, she had sat him down for a psychic reading. And she said, I'm going to tell you your future. And she told him 3 things. She said, when you grow up, you're going to marry a woman with strawberry blonde hair. Then you're going to go on to have 2 sons, but I'm not going to live to see those boys. And then you're going to have 3 daughters, and those daughters will be in a band. Well, Austin had remembered this prophecy, and lo and behold, he meets his wife Annie, who is strawberry blonde. They go on to have 2 sons after his mother passed away. And he went on to have not 3, but 4 daughters, but that didn't matter. He had the 3 requisite daughters, who would then go on to form the band that his mother had talked about. When he realized that the first and second prophecy had indeed come true, he decided that it was time to force the third. So when the girls were in high school, he announced to them that it was time to begin the band. The day had come. And some people say that it's because he felt a need to make the prophecy happen. He was a deeply superstitious man. And he felt that the prophecy wasn't going to happen unless he took precautions to make it happen. Because the girls were not really into music. They didn't have these high goals and aspirations of becoming famous. They just wanted to go on to live the sort of lives that were around them. They were fine growing up, getting married, having kids, being a wife, maybe being a secretary. Like they weren't trying to break the mold here. But their dad was extremely oppressive. And it was his way or the highway. I mean, there was no going against Austin. When he said it was going to be, it was going to be. So his dream had to be fulfilled. But at the same time, Beatlemania was roaring through the country. As he's watching the whole world lose their minds over the Beatles, he remembers the prophecy that had been foretold over him. And since 2 of the 3 things had happened, it must be that this was the era, the time his daughters were supposed to sort of get together and form this band, because if the Beatles can do it, then why can't his daughters do it? The world was primed for the prophecy to come true. So he tells the girls, you're not going to school anymore. You're done. We're not doing that anymore, because I don't want you sullied by outside influences. And this is what's really strange about Austin. This is what's very peculiar about him. He didn't want his daughters to have any kind of secular influence on their lives. He was very rigid, very, very conservative, but it's odd because he wasn't the sort of person that seems to have had a grip on his children's lives because of religion necessarily, although they did go to church every Sunday. It doesn't feel like his morality was composed of Christian values specifically. His mother had been into tarot card reading. His mother had been into telling fortunes and reading palms. And as they would progress into trying to fulfill this prophecy that his mother had ordained over them and predicted over them, Austin would hold seances in their home in order to contact his dead mother to make sure that they were on the right track, right? So it feels like there was a lot of crossover as far as what he was allowing in his home and what he wasn't allowing in his home. He didn't want any secular influence. He didn't want his daughters mixing with the crowd. One of the reasons that he wanted to pull them out of school at the time was because he didn't want them riding the bus and, learning all kinds of things on the bus. And he just felt like there was just nothing but riffraff. So he's going to pull them out of high school so that they couldn't attend and they would be able to be at home. He enrolled them in a homeschool program, and their real objective was to practice music from sunup to sundown. That was his main goal. But it's strange because there's conflicting evidence as to what he was going to allow as their musical influence. I have heard many people say that the girls lived under such tight surveillance that they weren't allowed radios, they weren't allowed television, they weren't allowed records, that they had no musical training whatsoever, and that the subsequent production of music is a clear reflection that they had no idea from any other source how to make music. That their father was so strict that he wouldn't allow them to experience anything that could have informed them on how to make better music. Now, that might have been a reality once he got them at home, homeschooled. They were not allowed to leave the house. There's no going out. We don't leave the house. And so it may have been that previous to that, they were allowed to listen to music. And then after that, they weren't, because he was really big on having them create their own sound. He wanted them completely unsullied by the outside world. I've heard conflicting reports because I've definitely heard people say they never were allowed to listen to music and had never listened to music. But a piece in the New Yorker in 1999 that I leaned on heavily while I was researching this, that journalist said that they were allowed to listen to the music and that the girls had several artists that they were fans of, like Ricky Nelson, so it isn't as though they'd never heard any music before. And just listening to the music that they produced, it's very bad, but you can hear certain things in their music that would make it appear as though they had been influenced by the sound at the time. But setting aside the debate of whether they had ever listened to music before or not, it's very clear from everything that I researched that their father was not going to allow them to have any outside influences once he'd gotten them into the house, homeschooled, shut the doors, and they're not going out. The culture in the home, the schedule that they kept, is untenable. I cannot imagine how horrific this must have been for these teenage girls. Their names were Helen, Betty, and Dot, and their father had made their schedule for them, and this was it. They were to get up in the morning and first thing, start practicing. They were going to practice all day. They would have about 2 hours of homeschool. Then they'd practice all afternoon. Dinner. After dinner, they had to perform for their father the songs that they had been working on, and he would critique them mercilessly. There was one song they just could never get right called The Philosophy of the World, and they would play it and play it and play it. He always wanted to hear it, and it was never right. They could never get that one to a place that he liked. And after they finished their round of being criticized, then they would have to do calisthenics. Their dad wanted them to work out because he said they needed to remain fit and ready for, they need to be at peak performance level at all times. Judging by the photos, I would say that the dad was no personal trainer. So I'm not really sure what kind of exercises these girls were doing. But it was an existence of pure torture because it was all designed towards fulfilling the dad's fantasy of them becoming this world-renowned band. And it was unrelenting. This went on for a solid 3 years. The girls were not allowed out of the house. It was practicing from sunup to sundown. And it was being criticized roundly by their dad. Their exercise at night, go to bed, wake up, do it again, do it again, do it again. Their 2 reprieves during the week were Friday night, the whole family would go grocery shopping, and Sunday they would go to church. And that was it. This was their lives. Now, keep in mind, these girls, this is not like little kids. These are girls well into their teens. But these are girls who have been conditioned that you don't question. Whatever your father says, that's what you're doing. There was no, Daddy, can we not do this? Daddy, can we not do that? No. It was his way or the highway. And it didn't even occur to you that you were going to do differently, except for sometimes when their dad was away, they would get out their instruments and arrange them to make it look like they had practiced, but then they would sneak out and go to the lake. So to his face, there was constant, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir, no, sir. It was don't question, don't make an argument, just do it. But their hearts were not in it. When you hear the music, it is deadpan, it is sad, it's hollow. Apart from all of the rhythmic issues, the tonal issues, the guitars are never in tune, the girl playing the drum, it sounds like a lizard got lost in the kick drum. It is just absolute chaos and noise. And every time you think, okay, we've slipped into a groove, okay, let's keep going, it suddenly shifts. We've got different keys, strange chords being played, random strumming. It is like somebody's playing two different songs at once. It's wild to me that these strange songs that sound like such an accident were ever able to be reproduced in any other scenario. But every day they'd be practicing these same little songs. And they did what their dad told them to do, but you can hear there's no joy in it. Not once did they want to do this. This had never been their dream. They didn't want to play music all day. They didn't want to be in a band. They had no wild aspirations. They didn't feel like, oh, okay, well, maybe I didn't want to do this, but maybe this could be a reality for me. And part of the problem, too, was being cut off from the world. They weren't able to associate themselves and their goals with Beatlemania, with rock and roll, with the fact that there was this whole revolution going across the country. They might have been able to grab onto some of that energy and believe that they, too, could be as great as some of these other bands that were coming up. It might have excited them towards this fantasy of their fathers, but being cut off and just having to play these songs and try to make him happy, it was just torture. Day in and day out. After a while, Austin felt like the girls needed to go out and perform. It was time. And they'd been practicing for 3 years solid at their house. So the time had come. So in 1968, their father arranged for them to play at a talent show. And the results were predictable. They got up and played this song, The Wheels. It was like this country song that they had written. And they were roundly mocked and humiliated. People threw soda cans at them and screeched and mocked and derided and heckled, and it was so embarrassing for them. They just wanted to be normal kids. They wanted to be friends with their peers. They didn't want to be locked in the house all day, homeschooling and playing music around the clock for their dad. Never having an outing outside of Friday night family grocery shopping. It was so humiliating. They had no say in their lives. They didn't even have a say in the name of the band. Their father had chosen the name the Shaggs. The dad named them the Shaggs because of the famous haircut of the Beatles and because of a movie in the 1950s about a dog named Shaggy. And so he decided that that would be a good name for them. But not only did he decide it was a good name for the band, he also decided that their personal appearance needed to reflect the name of the band. So their dad personally cut their hair and gave them this really thick fringe and these bangs that came down to here.
Oh my God!
And that was their dad's doing. We all needed to have a uniform look, and Dad was at the helm of that. So their band is called the Shaggs, their hair is cut by their dad, and here they are playing songs that he's approved that literally nobody wanted to hear. Not only was the music dissonant and discordant, there's all kinds of wacky rhythms that are all competing with each other. It all sounds like a mistake. But their lyrics weren't real deep either. Here's a sample of a song they wrote called Things I Wonder. There are many things I wonder. There are many things I don't. It seems as though the things I wonder most are the things I never find out. So you really couldn't even sink your teeth into some really meaty, thoughtful lyrics. If the music was going to be bad, maybe the lyrics were something that you could really think about. Philosophy of the world, it sounds like we might be getting a few things. You're not. People were very cruel to them. So they left that performance and it was an embarrassment. It was horrible. They hated it. But their dad said that it was just because you've never performed before. So we're going to do it again. The second time they performed was at a little shindig at the local nursing home. They went to go play on Halloween. Dot had written a special song for it entitled It's Halloween. And, the old folks, they're not going to be mean to you. They politely clapped and, they probably thought that this was something that the girls were proud to do and were excited to do. And, they weren't going to break the poor girls' spirits. But it was evident that these poor old people they couldn't even get out of their wheelchairs. They couldn't escape if they wanted to. So they just had to sit there listening to the nasal deadpan songs. And, it's easy to make fun of the songs just because they're so terrible. But also, I feel like the songs reflect the pain the girls were in. It cannot be overestimated how abusive the home was. Their dad was so cruel to them, so mean to them. And there were all kinds of rumors that abounded about this family. They were very strange people, not just because they kept their daughters locked in the house and were trying to make them into some kind of a band, but because there was all sorts of rumors that Austin was inappropriate with his daughters. Now, Betsy, upon being asked, says that never happened, but Helen says that it did. Helen was the drummer. She was the oldest, and she was a little bit more rebellious than the other girls. She says that her father once was inappropriate with her and was intimate with her. And interestingly, all three girls went on to live pretty normal blue-collar lives. Helen went on to receive disability because her depression was so severe. And you can only wonder if that depression was because of abuse at the hands of her father, where the other girls say they didn't experience that and were able to, live relatively normal lives. Helen wasn't. Another strange thing about this family was that Austin's father and Annie's mother went on to have their own relationship after they were each individually widowed. And people in the town thought that was weird, that Austin's father and Annie's mother would get together and have another relationship. And, it's not really that weird. It's not the weirdest thing, but the whole family kind of seemed like it was, there was just sort of this incestuous, they only go in amongst each other kind of vibe. And so the town thought they were just whack. And that was really one of the reasons why Austin felt driven to make this work, because he wanted to prove we are not crazy. In fact, we're better than you. Just watch us thrive. Just watch us. Just, say all you want to say, but we are better than the rest of you. We have goals, dreams, and ambitions. We don't plan on staying making barrels and handkerchiefs for the rest of our lives, So his three daughters are placed once again at the helm when he finds out that there is an opportunity for his daughters to play every week at the local town hall. This is huge for Austin because now his daughters get to have kind of a goal as to why they're practicing. It's hard to practice music when you don't have like a recital coming up or some kind of reason why you're being driven to practice, on and on and on. So Austin, who was really a loner or crotchety, just disagreeable, caustic, unfriendly sort of person, never missed a town meeting. If there was a town meeting going on, Austin was there. He wanted to make sure he had his say. So there was a town meeting, and they said that they wanted to get up some kind of entertainment for the kids on Saturday nights because the kids were getting into trouble. There's a lot of drunkenness, a lot of sadness, a lot of depression. Fremont was just a really depressing place. In fact, there was a guy named Matthew Thomas, and he wrote a book called History of Fremont, New Hampshire. And in that book, he describes Fremont this way. He said, loneliness contributed to severe depression, illness, and drunkenness for countless rural families. He said there may have been some nice, pleasant times, but for the most part, death, sickness, disease, accidents, bad weather, loneliness, strenuous hard work, insect-infested foods, prowling predatory animals, and countless inconveniences marked day-to-day existence. So you can imagine that if that is your existence, probably the children were getting up to no good on a Saturday night. So the town decided that they would put on some entertainment for the kids. You know, some appropriate drinks, some snacks, and live music. Well, live music, you say, says Austin. I got just the thing. So he ends up booking his daughters for every Saturday night. And it was a family affair. This wasn't just the three girls having to show up. The whole family was involved in this. The whole family's life revolved around this band that was going to make it, according to Austin. So everybody comes. They all, they schlep their cases of drink over there because every Friday night, the Pepsi truck would roll up to their house and drop off many cases of beverages. They schlepped the stuff over to the town hall. They set it all up. Annie, the mother, she's on concessions. The girls, of course, are in the band. The two older brothers, not to be left out, are on tambourine and maracas for a couple of songs. And so the whole thing was just a Wiggin family production. People came. There wasn't really anything else to do. And every teenager from the town had been to one of these little dances. And people would come, and some people would openly jeer them and make fun of them. Some people who would go just kind of went because it was something to do, and they came to socialize and sort of put up with the racket in the background. It was just more humiliation, more trauma of being just ridiculed by your peers, more sadness that they weren't out there dancing and getting to know these people. They were just on the stage singing their wacky, sad songs, and they just kind of had to always be on the outside of everything. Their dad was there to make sure they didn't mix and mingle. This was not a time for them to get to know people. This was a time for them to provide a service and keep working on their music. The next day was Sunday. Of course, you had church in the morning, but then the girls had to go to town hall, get on their hands and knees, and scrub off any of the scuff marks that had been left on the floor to make sure that there was no evidence of these Saturday night parties. And they had to make sure that the hall was put back together. And everything about their lives just seems so torturous. There's nothing to look forward to. In a sad way, there was, they said, something exciting about those Saturday nights. Not because they wanted to play music. Not because they enjoyed people looking at them or recognizing them or anything like that. Because it was never positive. But it was because they got to get out of the house. So they could add this to one of the times they were allowed out of the house. Of course, Friday night we go grocery shopping as a family. Sunday night was church. But now, Saturday night, they get to go play music. And yes, they're ridiculed and humiliated. But it was something to look forward to, something different, some reason to get out of the house. But all of it is just so monotonous and horrible and wretched. Well, after almost 4 years of this, the dad decided it was time for them to go and record an album. So they went to the outskirts of Boston, a city that was 50 miles away that they'd never been to. Their lives, they were as sheltered as it is possible to be. But they go to the outskirts of Boston, and their dad has paid for them to record an album. Now, at the time, recording fees were like $60 an hour. But this was like the man's life savings. It literally was his life savings. He pulled out his savings so that his daughters could record. Now remember, he's already drained his savings once buying a drum kit, a bass, a guitar from a local pawn shop, cheap instruments so his daughters could play. There's some talk that he paid for some voice and instrument lessons, but either these girls were completely inept at receiving those instructions, or that's just something they talked about doing but didn't actually do, because there's no evidence they had any understanding of what they were doing whatsoever. I mean, they couldn't even keep a simple 4/4 beat. So while he believed that they were ready to record, the engineer there, after listening to them, said, I think maybe we don't record today. Maybe keep practicing, girls. But they'd been practicing for 4 years of every day. There was no more practicing that they could do. And the dad said, no, I got to get them while they're hot. Let's start recording, all right? Girls, set up. And at the time, at a recording studio, there had been times earlier when recording music had first started that the whole band would just play the music and they'd record the whole thing. But by the time they'd come in 1969, it was typical that each person would play their instrument and then you'd, combine the music. And that wasn't the way Austin wanted it done. Probably because it was so expensive that we cannot be taking time to record everybody separately. And also, I have no idea what the music would have sounded like if they had separated, because well, they don't really seem like they're relying on each other in any conceivable way. They honestly do all sound like they're playing their own song. Maybe their dad was afraid that whatever harmonies they'd managed to come up with in those few times when it was sounding okay, maybe he was afraid they would lose that. I don't know. I'm telling you this much right now. I know Austin wasn't a big fan of music, but was he a big fan of sound at all? I mean, the fact that he thought they were ready is wild. Okay, I would just like to play you just a little bit of a song called My Pal Foot Foot, about one of the girls' lost cat named Foot Foot. Okay. What was that, you guys? What was it? And this is what the dad felt that he should pay $60 an hour for. So they make the album. They call it Philosophy of the World. 1,000 albums are pressed. The record label gives their dad 100 of those records. And he said that he kept all of them at the studio, and anybody who wanted one, he would give them one of the albums. But the sisters say that their dad lost a ton of money and that this guy was this fraudulent, crazy nut who scammed their dad out of all this money. The producers said that it's not that they weren't distributing these albums. It's that nobody wanted the albums. And I would also say that this producer who made the album was embarrassed that he had anything to do with it. So he probably wasn't out there advertising that this was, his work, because it was embarrassing to him. So they make the album. Nothing comes of it, predictably, And the dad says, we just have to keep practicing. So a year later, he books the studio again. This time, the producers beg him, please, we don't want to take your money. The girls need more work. They need more work. Got to get them while they're hot, says Austin. So again, they record. But at the time, nothing came of these second recordings. They just sort of existed, but not in any actual form. The dad, though, believed that these girls were, they were just on the cusp, they were just on the cusp of becoming something. And so he was taking home videos, he was taking pictures, just so they would have a whole stockpile of extra, backstage sorts of, exciting things that were going on with the Shaggs. But nothing ever came of it, It just was this thing that they all kept plodding along, trying to do, and they just couldn't get it together. This went on for years. At one point, Helen, the drummer, and also the one who you'll recall has said that her dad was inappropriate with her, and who others say had a rebellious spirit, I wonder why that would be, went off and secretly got married. She'd met somebody at one of these Saturday night town hall events. She liked him and he liked her, and they'd secretly gotten married. Now, at the same time that Helen had secretly gotten married and been too scared to tell her family, and let her father know that she had, gone off and gotten married and was living at home for 3 weeks, secretly married, not able to tell her dad what she had done. The town hall decided that they were no longer going to put on these Saturday shows. It's not totally clear why they decided they didn't want it, but there was some talk that kids were, bringing drugs to the events, that the hall wasn't being taken care of properly, and that it was just better for them to disband. The girls in the band were thrilled. Also, Helen wanted to go and be married. She didn't want to do this anymore. So the night that she managed to tell her dad, okay, we don't have that, gig anymore at town hall, and I actually have something else I need to tell you. I'm married, and I have been married for 3 weeks. And her dad lost his mind. He grabbed a shotgun and went and chased Helen's new husband with the shotgun. The police got involved, and it was this big showdown, and the police told her, you have to choose a man. Either choose your dad or choose your husband. And Helen chooses her husband, You guys, she was 28. Let that sink in. The girl was 28 years old. She had been under the possessive thumb of her father for 28 years of her life. This is a person who was well past the age of adulthood, who could have left at any time, but so abused was she, and so certain was she that all hell would break loose if she tried to get away from her father, that she was 28 years old before she managed to break free. Still, the group went on to practice, so she might have gone to live with her husband, but the pull was strong from her demented father. They're still practicing, they're still getting together. But it all fell apart, because one night when they did their requisite performance for their dad so he could tell them they did everything wrong, and he asked them to play the Philosophy of the World song that they could never get right for him, they finally played it, and he said, "You finally got it right. That's the way I want it done." And then that night, he died in his bed of a heart attack. Well, thank the Lord. All the girls were like, oh, thank God. They went their separate ways, right? The 2 other girls get married. Helen's already married. Their mother stayed in the house for a little bit, but then she sold the house. Everyone's grown now. And she went and got an apartment in town. And they sold the house to somebody else. But that somebody else said that he couldn't live in the house, that after living there for a while, he felt the ghost of Austin haunting the house, and he couldn't take it anymore. So on the property, he went and built a bigger, better, nicer house in the back of the property, called the fire department and said, "Do you need a house to burn down to practice with?" And so the fire department came and burnt the house down for an exercise. How's that for the ending of a story? Austin may have died, and the girls may have thought that this dream and ambition of his went with him. But strangely, somebody found this record that they had made about the late 80s, like 1988. And it was so bad that it really caught the attention of this person. And they wanted to find out all they could about the girls, and sort of this new concept in elite, music critic circles. These super educated, very formally taught musicians. And they had this new concept that they called outsider art. And outsider art is music, art that is produced by people who don't have formal training. And it was like this whole study of like, oh, how odd, how interesting that they would do this. Listen to these rhythmic patterns. And this whole sort of school of critique looked at artists, painters, musicians who were creating not under the guise of tradition or influenced by what's good, but by however the spirit led. It's a real snobby kind of thing. It's the study of outsider art. It's like, it kind of takes on the whole tone of like, look what these savages were able to do. My God, isn't that clever of them? It's very like, let me pull my glasses at the end of my nose and examine this Aboriginal experience. I mean, it's just very snobby, I think is the only word for it. So this music of the Shaggs was discovered at a time when that whole genre of study, the study of the outside art, was kind of coming into its full bloom. And they are the perfect band for it, because this is a band who, according to whatever source you're looking at, had no musical understanding whatsoever. If you want to go with what some sources say, they'd never even heard music in their life. There's other sources that say they had, but they just weren't heavily influenced by it because their parents didn't like music. Whichever way you want to go, this is 3 people who were not musically inclined by any stretch of the imagination. And if voice lessons or music lessons were part of their eventual sound, you would know it. And this is a group of people who were under extreme duress to perform something and to produce something for a maniac. Their father was a maniac. The whole family's existence was influenced by a prediction that his crazy media mother had come up with decades before. And a prediction that he had forced. Him meeting and marrying a strawberry blonde woman could have possibly been forced on his part, but his having 2 sons who showed up after his mother died wasn't something that he could have managed. So I'm not sure why he felt that he needed to force so heavily this 3rd thing, but it had to be done. He was just obsessed with it, and his obsession became the whole family's life. And so you hear that in the music. You hear this haunting sadness. It's really sad music. The lyrics are sad. The experience is sad. In all the interviews with the girls, now that they're grown and now that people have become aware of the story and are fascinated by this story, they all say they didn't want to do it. They weren't happy doing it. It wasn't their dream. It wasn't their fantasy. It wasn't anything they had wanted for themselves, and they never came to wanting it. Dot kind of, I think, at one point thought maybe it could be an interesting thing, but even she wasn't really sold on it. It was just, if there was one girl who was maybe into the idea that this could be something, it was Dot. But for the most part, none of them cared. And none of them are sentimental about the music now. You don't play it and they're like, oh, good time. It's like, yeah, it's a thing I did one time. They don't care. But their father was in such a swirl of delusion that listen to what he wrote in the liner notes for the album that they made, The Philosophy of Life. Listen to this utter delusion. The Shaggs are real, pure, unaffected by outside influences. Their music is different. It is theirs alone. They believe in it, live it. Of all contemporary acts in the world today, perhaps only the Shaggs do what others would like to do, and that is perform only what they believe in, what they feel, not what others think the Shaggs should feel. The Shaggs love you. They will not change their music or style to meet the whims of a frustrated world. You should appreciate this because you know they are pure. What more could you ask? They are sisters and members of a large family where mutual respect and love for each other is at an unbelievable high. In an atmosphere which has encouraged them to develop their music unaffected by outside influences. They are happy people and love what they are doing. They do it because they love it. Apart from the fact that that is the crappiest bit of writing I've ever read from a grown man. What are you talking about, you psychopath? They are happy people? On which track do we hear that? And they love what they're doing? Couldn't tell. They do it because they love it. Oh, did they love to be locked in their house 24/7? Did they love not having friends? They had nothing. They had no childhood existence. Because even before they were dragged out of high school and locked in the house, their dad had been incredibly insular of the family anyway. So you add the fact that this man forces them into their house. They are forced into isolation. They are forced to practice from sunup to sundown. They are forced to exercise because their dad's always telling them that they're fat, so they gotta have an hour of exercise every day. They're forced to perform for him every night while he criticizes them up one side and down the other. They're forced to weekly humiliate themselves in front of their peers, which feels like a tactic on his part to be like, see, you don't want to be friends with them anyway because they're mean. Everything that he did was to force them into this container that he wanted them to be in. Then you add the fact that there was potentially, and according to Helen, actual and in fact abuse happening. And it's like, this isn't just like a real strict dad that wants to make sure to protect their kids. Because what parent doesn't want to protect their kids? This was a psychopath. Everybody in the family was pulled into this man's delusion, and all because he decided to listen to his mother, who wanted to read his palm and tell him about his tarot card predictions. This is what I'm saying. These little things like, oh, it's just a tarot reading, it's just palm reading, it's just fun. No, it isn't, because look at the way it destroyed these girls' lives because their father believed this needed to happen. I suppose the irony of the thing is that they did go on to a certain amount of fame. Their band sort of had this cult following. And there are even groups of people who try to replicate what they were doing in this music. And the music is incredibly difficult to play. The music doesn't follow any sort of traditional rhythm, meter. It's atonal, it's dissonant. They're speeding up, they're slowing down. We're playing one beat, we're playing another beat. We can't stay in tempo. I mean, it's just chaotic. But there are groups that have tried to transcribe this music, and it's super hard to do.
It's amazing trying to learn their songs because, I mean, it just feels kind of like the ultimate aesthetic philosophical problem where you have, like a mix of disorder, and whether it's intentional or not, I feel like is kind of the main debate. It seems like the hardest thing is to memorize all of the melody. There's so much melody. It's really melismatic and it's really irregular. So every syllable has a different pitch. So when you sing like "My pal's name is Foot," there's a separate pitch to every word always on every song, like every time. And then the guitar always matches it. So it just seems like there's this pull, and then whether it goes with the drums or not is like completely, there's no like rules.
But there's tribute bands. There are people who really think that this music was ahead of its time. But I don't know. I think the real fascination behind this music is because of the story behind it. And I highly doubt that if this music had been created by three people who were trying to create the sound and who wanted this to be the way it sounded, I don't think the music would have taken off. I think the music is enjoyed because the story is so wild. And because the music was created in part by accident, the sound is an accidental sound. And yet you really have people who are trying to impose upon it all sorts of intended meaning. And I think it's so much simpler than that. I think the pain is in the music because they were in pain. I think the strange and dissonant tempo is because their life was out of step with the entire world in a negative way. And I think that the music is not intentionally brilliant. I think it's the cry of three girls who wanted to just be done with it already. Just please your dad and move on. Well, thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you found that story as interesting as I did. We have so many things coming up for us with Megan's show coming out yesterday. I also finally got Entitled, the book about Prince Andrew. And so we will be starting that shortly. Anyway, I will see you guys later this week. Thank you guys so much for hanging out. Talk to you soon. Bye.